people here have had Mr. Vincent Randall as a teacher or a coach? Would you please stand up? I know you have too. Anyway, Mr. Randall has been in the Verde Valley forever. He's a cultural treasure. He's an Apache elder. He's the youngest person ever to be voted into the Yavapai Apache Council. He's the youngest chairman of the council. He's a cultural resource and a treasure for the town of Clarkdale. Please welcome Mr. Vincent Randall.
Ai da pegojon kon zo kaido zang wa khosira shia de sni nen shlini de je hati slina yo onen slina ka jentin mun shtini de sni di I welcome you in my Apache language this morning. I said good morning. I said thank you for coming. And I told you that I am an Ane, which means a member of the human race, the people. And I'm a sub-branch that belongs to the Diljan people, which means the hunters. We are clannish people. We follow our family line from our mother's side. And my mother was a Yuana, which is a clan that roamed the country from Flagstaff all the way out through Sholo and the timber country. And we're given as a gift to our people, our father's people. We mentioned that. And my father was a Saint Eaton, which means the people that lived in a place where the willows grow out of the rocks, which is the north end of Star Valley near Payson, Arizona. Thank you for coming. And this morning, the presentation will be about some of the subjects concerning Clarkdale and about the people that were here. And we'll just kind of have a discussion and see where it takes us. So if you'll open up with the first slide. First of all, I mentioned that there were people here before the people that I'm talking about today. We call them in Apache Nalkeda, which means the people before us. And the people before us, of course, people lived in places like Tussiewood, which is something I would like to mention today to the public here. When they were excavating, my great-uncle, Ben Lewis, was one of the persons working there. And he was, of course, being a full Apache. They asked him about what was the name of this place in Apache. And he said, Tussiewood. And this or that woo sound, they interpreted it as a hard G. And so today, people go around saying, Tussiegood. Okay, Tussiegood is not the proper name because what you are saying in Apache is, well, first of all, the true term is Tussiewood. That's the name of the place. Tu means water, Seawood means crooked. It's crooked water. At one time, the river made a bend around there and went around the monument or where the structure is today. That's why it was called Tussiewood, crooked water. But if you say Tussiegood, what you are saying is, again, Tu means water, Sigud means knee. So what you're saying is water on my knee. So that's so those are the people that were here before us, and it is these people, I think, that we get some of interaction with them, and we have some stories, which is one of them is that both cultures today, there's the two tribes, are in the Verde Valley, the Yavapai and the Apache people. And both tribes go back to a story that they lived when they were created, they lived underground, below the surface of the earth. And because things did not work out, and all kinds of things happened down there that was not right, a group of people migrated, and they came out through Montezuma Well. In Apache, we call it Tushitles, which means broken water. And they came up on the surface and began a new life on the surface here, and began to move out to places where they lived and began a new life. And where they settled, the families that settled there and became, as a group there, then became a clan group. First of all, they had an immediate family and an extended family, and then the people that lived within that area then became one big group, and that's how the clans were formed. And the clans have their names from the geographic place where they come from. For instance, in Yuana, that's the country, as I said before, the timber country from Flagstaff to Sholo. That's a description of that place. But the specific place where Yuana is Clint's Well. That's where the main headquarters, or whatever you want to call it. Here in the Verde Valley, there was, in the Camp Verde country, was the Yakoigayan, which means the white land people, because of the white land. The mountain sitting above Camp Verde, which was known as Squaw Peak, but now the name has been changed to Porcupine Mountain. But the name of the place in Apache is Tasinadastayin, which means where the porcupine suns himself or sits on the mountain. And there was a clan there, and they all roamed that part of the country, Pine Mountain and so forth. So that's how the people then moved out up on the land. So today, those are some of the people that are still here. Of course, we lived off the land. We roamed the land. We did some farming. We were food gatherers and hunters. This is what I want to talk a little bit about and talk about what went on. First of all, this slide shows you the area that's in kind of reddish pink. That's what the Diligent people, the subgroup of Apaches called the hunters, roamed all the way down towards Tucson. All the area in blue, the Yavapais roamed. Over 10 million acres, all the way from the Verde River to the Colorado River. Go ahead, slide. We roamed all that country, and nobody actually bothered us until the Spaniards came through here in 1583, Espejo's expedition. Then the next group of Europeans that came through after 1583 wasn't until 1820, when Ewing Young and his trappers came up the Verde River and trapped on all the tributaries all the way up through here. And one of the trappers that came with him was a guy named Bill Williams, which now has a mountain named after him, Bill Williams Mountain, near Williams, Arizona, and that's all because of Bill Williams. And then in later years, the next group of people, around when gold was discovered in California, the next group of people come in were the prospectors. And this caused a problem because, you can change, this then brought in what we call the Indian Wars, which was, first of all, the Yavapais met this situation because gold was discovered in their territory, which was around Prescott. And as the miners came in, I don't know who fired the first shot, but the miners were being attacked, so they asked for the government to bring out soldiers, and the soldiers came and began a massive campaign against them, so that by 1868, almost all of the Yavapais had surrendered and were put on a reservation called Camp Dade Creek, north of Wickenburg. And then the most important thing about this campaign was that one of the generals that came and did the campaign against the Yavapais and the Apaches was General Crook. And General Crook was a general that believed that it took an Indian to catch an Indian. So he recruited scouts from Fort Apache, White River, Arizona, and some Wallapais. And then after the Yavapais were subdued, he used some Yavapais and did a massive campaign. And it was a search and destroy situation of where the soldiers went out every day and hunted down the people so that the people had no peace or anything. This then brought in something that started even back during the revolutionary days. This is what we call a reservation system that came into existence. There are three types of reservations that are created through one. First of all, the first one is what I call a treaty reservation. A treaty reservation is a situation of where there is a negotiation between the two parties, the tribes and the government, and coming up to a decision. Then it was taken to Congress and passed through Congress. The president signed it, the treaty, and that's how the people got a reservation or some land. And the second way to settle things were that was done away with, and under Ulysses S. Grant. And Ulysses S. Grant then did away with what we could, the treaty compromise reservations, and set up what he called peace commissioners, and set up the next type of reservation, which is an executive order. And an executive order is the president then, through his peace commissioners that went out on the land, would set up a piece of land where the Indians would come in, and it's supposed to be forever. What's the old saying? As long as the grass grows and the river runs and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and the third reservation is something that happened after what we call termination years. Back in the 50s, under the Eisenhower administration, was the years that termination of reservation came into existence with the lure of money. The government said, you can come and what we'll do is, if you come in and agree to some money and so forth, we'll give you the money as long as you forfeit your land. So there were quite a few tribes that did this. There are tribes in Wisconsin, on the northwest areas and so forth, and money was given out and the reservations were given up. And anyway, then brought in the third type of reservation, which is almost like the first one, is that and of all things, it was a little tribe in Arizona that was able to do this, and it opened the door for the reservations that were terminated to come back into the reservation system. And this was the Payson Tonto Apaches. They were a number that was about 100 people, but with the help of a young lawyer by the name of Joe Sparks and the leadership of people like Barry Goldwater and so forth, they were able to pass a bill through Congress, which was signed by the president on October the 6th, 1972, and brought in what I call a congressional reservation. And this one is binding. So what happened then back with the Yavapais and Apaches was after the campaign by General Crook and the soldiers and everything, the Yavapais got a reservation that was an executive order one over by Wickenburg in 1868. In the meantime, the Army was hunting down the Apaches on the east of the Verde, and Ulysses S. Grant sent out a peace commissioner by the name of Vincent Coiler, which I have no connection with the word Vincent at all. And but anyway, he came out, and with Crook, he said, "All right, you guys are still fighting us. If you will come in, we'll set aside a piece of land where you can be safe and nobody will bother you." So in 1871, the Rio Verde Reservation was brought into the system. And the land that was set up by Vincent Coiler was the land that was, what it did was, it started down there, you got the pointer, right there down the middle there, down just right there, is about where the bridge crosses the river down by Camp Verde. From that point, 45 miles up the river and 10 miles on both sides of the river was set aside as a reservation. That's 900 square miles. It went from that point by Camp Verde all the way up by Paulden. And on both sides of the river then was set aside. And the Apache people started coming in 1871. One of the groups that came from the mountain country of the pine country was under a man by the name of Hustin Nez, which means tall old man. Him and his people came into Camp Verde and said, "We surrender, we're not going to fight anymore." And they came onto the reservation. Then the Apaches down there by Payson and the Tonto Basin came in under a guy named Chahlipa, which means gray hat. And they came in. And in the Army records, it states that Chahlipa said, "I can't fight you guys anymore. We can't fight you anymore. We have nothing to eat. We're tired. Our children need help. And we're not afraid of you, but we can't fight you and our own people. So we're coming in." So they came into Camp Verde and surrendered. The third Apache group to come in wasn't until 1873, and that was under the leader of a guy named Tilche, which means the red ant. And he came in he's the group of people that led people all the way from the Matzatzal Mountains by Payson all the way down into Aravaipa country in below Globe, Arizona. And when he came in, he didn't trust the army, so he, in 1873 is when he came in and surrendered, but then he only stayed for a very short time and broke out with some of his people and continued fighting. And eventually, General Crook put a price on his head, and 3 skulls were brought in that was supposed to be Telche or the Red Ant. Now, most of the time, if you read about this, they can't say Telche, so they became Delche. If you read about Delche, it's really Telche, which means the Red Ant. So now we have this group of people now have come in to be on the Rio Verde Reserve. And the first agency that they set up was over here at Peck's Lake. And the only problem was at Peck's Lake. And from the studies that I've done in reading and so forth, evidently the valley must have been a worn place, because one of the big problems was mosquitoes and malaria. And it caused a lot of disease and sickness. So the agency was moved from Peck's Lake over to Haskell Springs, which is on just west of Yavapai College today. And that agency was set up. Now the Yavapais were over at Camp Day Creek, but they were done away with the reservation, and they were marched over here in 1873 and brought to the Rio Verde Reserve. So now you have 2 tribes that are brought together, 2 tribes that have different cultures, different languages. The Yavapai speak a different language than the Apaches. It's like one speaks Chinese and the other one speaks French. They don't get able to communicate with their language. So we have 2 tribes now. So the Yavapai settled near the agency at Haskell Springs. The Apaches settled across the river at Dead Horse Park. And both tribes dug ditches and began farming. And so this is something here now that this is one of those what-if stories. First of all, the treaty reservations kind of went blank for a while, shall we say. And these were the tribes mostly in the northeastern part of the country, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and that part of the country. Those were the tribes that really did the treaty things, but were really never gotten any land. But lo and behold, they found these old treaties and were able to go to the government and say, look, this is what we signed and everything. So they got some of the land back, and those tribes then got some land back. And one of course, they're better known for their casinos than anything, like Foxborough and some of these others. And so they kind of honored and brought back that system. Now the executive order one is what is something that came, and this Rio Verde Reserve is an executive order, and the Yavapais in 1868, that was an executive order. So an executive order is something that is proclaimed by the government through the president. And the president can do away with a reservation. It's worthless. the ink on the piece of paper that makes this reservation. It can be done away before it even dries, because the president can say, nope, no more. And that's what happened with the Yavapais. Their reservation was taken away from them, and that's why they were marched over here on the Rio Verde Reserve. Now, if they would have honored the reservation, this executive order, and if it was still in existence today, I always wonder how things would have been. Would there have been a Clarkdale? Would there have been a Jerome? A possibility. But I know one thing. I would have been here. I would have been driven here in a limousine, and I would have been living in a big chalet over there on top of the hill where I live. We'd have been rich. Jerome would have just taken us, we'd have been rich. But I always think about these things, and I'm sure there probably would have been Jerome, because we'd have had to mine it. And the government is always putting their fingers in what we do. There's a book called Title 25, and it's still in existence today. Title 25 is a book where our relationship with the government through the reservation, these lands that are set aside are called trust land. These are trust land, which means that they are more or less under the federal government. And as usual, the federal government knows what's best for us. So under Title 25, they control everything. So there probably would have been Jerome, because they would have allowed the miners to come in and mine, and they would have had a place to live. Smelter, I don't know whether we would have had a smelter. Anyway, where we're sitting today, we probably wouldn't have been anything. Sometimes our people are very conservative, and they like things the way they are. They say that God made it that way, then that's the way it should be. Why change it? So maybe this would have just been a little hill with a few cactus plants and so forth. But be as it may, I just wonder if there would have been a smelter here. I don't know. But things would have been a lot different if the government would have honored this executive order reservation. But through our research with Chris Coder, who's an archaeologist that I work with, through our research, they really never really intended for us to continue to live here forever, because they were already setting up township lines and surveyors and so forth. But the biggest influence that did away with this reservation was a group of entrepreneurs in Tucson known as the Tucson Gang. The Tucson Gang was a group of people that were supplying the reservation, because when the people came in, the government promised them not only did they have a safe place to live and so forth, but they would furnish food. And so the staples were brought in: flour, bacon, potatoes, whatever it is. And there's kind of some neat stories about that came down through my family. My grandma told me, she said, when they first came on the reservation, they gave us flour. We didn't know what to do with flour. Did we paint ourselves with flour? What do we do with it? And so she said that there was a Mexican by the name of Güero who was a scout, working with the scouts, she said. And he's the one that showed us how to make tortillas, he said. We learned how to make tortillas, and he showed us how to do it. And we got coffee, she said. And we didn't know what to do with coffee. They gave it us beans, and they told us to boil it. So we boiled the beans, and it never did anything, she said, until we learned how to grind it, and then we knew that it was a good drink, she said. And the potatoes, they told us, boil it. So we boiled it and become mushy, and we couldn't eat that either. So we had to learn a whole new way of life. And to me, the ration is probably one of the most thing that also was really a cultural breakdown. Here was a group of people that had depended on the land, that had depended on their own resources to put food on the table and so forth, as food gatherers, farmers, and so forth. And now they were given rations and so forth. And it brought something out. Instead of using their hands to do something, they opened their hands this way. And that is something that today, to me, was the worst thing that ever happened to us, because there are so many of our people today, instead of using their hands, they're sticking their hands out saying, "Gimme." And gimme is not something that we used to do. We were independent people. You know, I was thinking about how the Army came into the Verde Valley. You know why they came in? Because 19 farmers came over the mountain from Prescott and started farming where the confluence of West Clear Creek and the Verde. And you know what? That was like setting up a Dollar General store. Because now we could raid them and take the corn and take the watermelons and so forth. It became a food source for us. And because of that, the people said, "We need the Army over here," and the Army came over. Something interesting about this is also in my studies and thinking, in our vocabulary in Apache. Watermelon is known as klekoidane. Klekoidane means you eat it at night. So when did we get the watermelons? At night. Barbecue. Barbecue meat is known as klekolchine, which means you smell it at night. We rustled the cattle from the settlers, and we couldn't cook it in the daytime because the settlers could see the smoke. The Army could see the smoke as we cooked it. So when did we cook it? We cooked it at night. So that's why you smelled it at night. And so it's known as, barbecue is known as you smell it at night. So anyway, as the years went, only a few years went by, and as I said, the Executive Order Reservation then was done away with in 1875, and during the month of February, in Apache known as Sasnaraye, which is the moon of when the snow melts, and we were marched out of here, Yavapais and Apaches, and we were marched 180 miles to San Carlos Reservation. And it was a grueling trip. It was done by a man by the name of Dudley. And General Crook and some of these people advised Dudley to take us around through Phoenix and a better, easier way. But Dudley said, "They're Indians, they can walk." So he marched us across our trails that started from Camp Verde down through Fossil Creek, up the rim, on down into the East Verde, all along there to the Roosevelt Lake, and eventually into San Carlos. And the march started, I believe, on February the 25th, and it started at the agency over there by Yavapai College. There was something like there are different numbers, but it seems to be something like 1,400 people marched. They divided us because we were enemies. They put the Apaches walking first, put the army between them, and the Yavapais behind them, and started the march from the agency. It took them 2 days to get to Camp Verde. And then they rested in Camp Verde, and then moved on, and it snowed on them and all. And they had some supplies, they had some cattle for meat and everything. But by the time they came to Fossil Creek, they ran out of the beef and had meager supplies. The other thing is, before they left for San Carlos, there was about 400 Apaches left that column and went back into the mountains. And there were some others in Fossil Creek that left there. The Smith family is one of them, and they hid out in Fossil Creek all that time. But because of the food supply and everything, there were 2 skirmishes between the Yavapais and Apaches on the way to San Carlos. One of them was over a deer. A soldier shot a deer, and because both group wanted the meat, they had a big fight over it. Nobody died on that one. Then as they went closer to the East Verde, there was a major conflict. The Yavapais attacked the Apaches, and there were numerous wounded, and I believe something like 7 or 8 that died. Eventually they made it to San Carlos, and when they got to San Carlos, it was a concentration camp. They could not leave without being hunted down and brought back. And that existed until 1886. In 1886, Geronimo was captured. And Geronimo was a fighter that tried to stay free. But he was captured and sent to, first of all, Alabama, and then eventually to Florida, and then back to Alabama, and then ended up in Fort Sill. In the meantime, when that happened, things loosened up. The Army was no longer concerned about people leaving the reservation. In fact, they set it up so that they eventually allowed Apaches to leave the reservation, and they wrote them a little letter saying, this Apache is a good Apache that won't bother you, cause any problems. So they started, one of the things they did was the Apaches and the Yavapais both started cutting hay, because Globe, which was a thriving mining town, needed the hay for their transportation, which was donkeys, mules, and horses. And so the animals needed hay, so they brought it to town and sold it. Began a new economic life, that they learned that by selling, they got money, the money then bought food. So they did that. They also sold wood, because everything was heating and cooking stoves were all by wood. And I always call that letter is it was the first green card for the people. So anyway, as those things happened, the other thing that happened too was that the superintendent of the San Carlos Reservation also began to be like a go-between. He was kind of like the union boss, and he sent out crews for labor because the labor wasn't available. So through that process, a lot of the Apaches and some Yavapais worked on the Roosevelt Dam and other projects. In the meantime, when things loosened up and they were able to leave the reservation and everything, then the move to come home started. And the reason why is that we're tied to the land. We believe that God, when He created us and put us in a place, that special place is known as Shikeya, my homeland. This is where we belong. And it reminds me of the Jews. They were dispersed all over the country, all over the world, until 1948. In 1948, when Israel was reestablished as a country, the Jews started going home. That was home. The land of Canaan that God gave them, that was home. And that's a draw for them. And that's the same way with us. San Carlos was not our home. These other places, where we came from, in my case, my family came from Clintswell country. And that was home. The people that came out of the white land people, the Camp Verde area, people came out of the Red Rocks, that was home. So they came home. But the only problem is when they came home, somebody else was there, took over and said, this is not your home anymore. This is ours. And the other thing is the government in 1905 grabbed up all the land and made it public land. And the Forest Service came into existence. And the Forest Service said, this isn't a place, you can't live here, this is government land now. And they had to eat and had to survive. And through the education of economic life now, they knew that if they had a place to live and work, they could at least eat something. So they started drifting to places where their relatives might have been. And so they developed camps here in the Verde Valley. By 1889, under some of the research I've done, there were over 400 to 600 Apaches and Yavapais in the Camp Verde area. And because of this, also, there was something that was said that our people served as scouts. One of the things was that, and I heard this stories when I was a boy from the old guys. They said, the Army told us that if we became scouts, we could come home. So we became scouts. And but the guy that promised them that was General Crook. And General Crook, because Geronimo ran away from him after Skeleton Wash agreement, he was sent out of here and replaced by other generals. But along about 1900, there was a General Miles, and I haven't found the document, but I believe General Miles was going to honor that if you served as scouts, you could come home. And what he was going to do was he was going to give the military reservation of Camp Verde to the people. And settlers got wind of that and did a massive campaign to try to stop it. And it never did come through. And so here were the people living on the land. There was a big camp by the salt mine, and there was a big camp out at Beaver Creek, and there was a big camp right here where the smelter used to be, and other places where they could kind of hang out, so to say, until somebody chased them off that land. And when Clark was going to come in and build the smelter, he told the people to move. And the Yavapais moved west and went in the wash up here. The Apaches moved south of town here. And I'm the last surviving Apache living south of town. And but anyway, they moved, and they moved to where the springs were. Where I live, down below me, was a spring, and they lived there. And where the new trailer court is, there was a spring there, so there was a camp there. And so the people then moved around, and then some of the people that said, look, we're tired of being chased around, so some of our people went back to San Carlos. They said, at least in San Carlos, nobody was bothering, so we're going back to San Carlos. So we got kinfolks in San Carlos, we got kinfolks over on Sibicu area, and of course, Payson. And eventually, as a town built up and everything, because and these camps and so forth, one of the things that is that our children and 4 Yavapai leaders went to the governor, I think his name was Goodwin, and said, in Camp Verde, our children couldn't go to school. And so they went, and they said, we want our kids to go to school. And Goodwin wrote a letter to the War Department, and they sent out a teacher by the name of Gabbard. And it was a blessing, because Gabbard was not only a teacher who started the school up there where the fort is today, and then eventually with his campaigning and so forth, a new piece of land was bought in Camp Verde, which was the beginning of the new reservation today. And eventually, Gabbard continued his campaign of writing and being and helping the people. He got Congress to appropriate some money, which was bought the Middle Verde section, and that became a reservation, an executive order reservation. And then the other pieces then came into existence. Beaver Creek, there was a settlement out there, and there was something like 80 acres that were fenced, but by the time the government lawyer was finished with it, those people only ended up with 3 acres. And then Clarkdale, back in 1969, the new owner of the land said that, look, we'll settle with you if you'll, we'll let you have this land as a reservation if you do some things. Number 1, you build new houses. Number 2, you have running water. Number 3, you have a sewage system. And those, if you'll do that, then we will turn the land over to you. So the agreement was made between the Indian Public Health Service to bring in the sewer and water, the Bureau of Indian Affairs to accept it in as a trust land or reservation, and the town of Clarkdale to have them connect the sewer to the town of Clarkdale. All the people came together, made an agreement, so in 1869, the land over here became a reservation. Now, when we say reservation, what we mean is that now the land is in trust. And when it's in trust, that's under the government, and the government has control over it. And again, being an executive reservation, there's still the threat over this reservation system that the president could do away with it tomorrow. But anyway, be as it may, that's the way it is today. So the town of Clarkdale and the reservation have been working together as a team for years and continue to do so today. Now, the people have become and developed their reservation and, of course, become citizens. They're citizens of the United States. And because of this relationship between the government and the people, the state has no jurisdiction over Indian people. The county has no jurisdiction over, when I say Indian people, I'm sorry. I mean, the state has no jurisdiction on the reservation. No, the county has no anything to do with the reservation, neither does the town. It's all done under what we call mutual agreement. I always tell the story about how if it wasn't for the mutual agreement between police departments, a fugitive could be running away from the police, and once they cross the reservation line, the police can't cross. It's the Clarkdale police or the county or the state. But because of mutual agreement, they do. And that's a process between the governments, allowing them to do that. So, and being patriotic people, there's a picture there at the bottom of a soldier. That's my great uncle, and they all served in the wars, Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, and projects and everything. So that's what it is today. And I guess I could do away. I don't need that limo. I don't need that big palace. But I'm just glad that for all the things that Clarkdale has done for me, I would like to say that it was something to grow up here in Clarkdale. It was the people very supportive. We kind of talked about how this place here holds a lot of history. I remember that I started my basketball career here in the 4th grade in this floor right here. And I coached my first basketball team here on this floor. And I played high school ball here and in Jerome. And this place holds a lot of memory. I remember the school plays that we had in here. And I served as a stage manager for the plays. We built props and so forth. I used to play the trumpet. I even played in a dance band for dances on this floor right here. So this is a nice place to come back to. And the town of Clarkdale has been good. It's been good to a lot of people, and I hope that it stays that way. So thank you for coming today, and that's kind of the story of the Yavapai and Apache people, and we commemorate the time that we were taken out of this place. We call it Exodus and Return Day, and we celebrate it on the last Saturday of this month. And you're welcome to come down to Camp Verde because they're planning the celebration. What we do is from sunup to noon is a solemn time. We go to one of our holy places with prayers and observance, and then from noon till sundown, we celebrate coming home. That this is home, and we celebrate it. So you're welcome to come and be part and help us celebrate. So I thank you for coming today, and if there's any questions or anything, I'll try to answer them. If not, I have a very good resource over here. I have my nephew, Dr. Mori over here.